From New York, this is Democracy Now!
We're expecting to hear the president say, I've heard your concerns yesterday and I'm ready to step down. This is not what we're expecting, to hear a long speech without any results for us.
We'll look at Zimbabwe, where longtime leader Robert Mugabe is refusing to resign as president. Then we're back from Bonn, Germany, where the UN Climate Summit has just concluded. Remember this?
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris.
That was Donald Trump months ago. We'll speak with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto.
If there was one city the president could point to that would represent what that spirit of the Paris Agreement was, it was Pittsburgh. And we've now exceeded what we promised in the Paris Agreement, and that's been happening throughout this country, throughout the United States.
And we'll talk to Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe about the anti-Trump revolt at the COP23.
I am here because we need to send a message to the world. Forget what Donald Trump says, that we are serious about climate change. I'm the governor of Virginia, and when Trump moved out of the Paris Climate Agreement, I was the first governor to come out and say, we're going to do it ourselves.
Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe about the climate and the political climate in his state, where a socialist Marine and a transgender woman have just won their races for public office. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Zimbabwe, longtime leader Robert Mugabe has stunned party leaders and opposition groups by refusing to resign as president. The announcement by the 93-year-old Mugabe came days after Zimbabwe's military seized government buildings across the capital, Harare, placing Mugabe under house arrest. On Sunday evening, Mugabe gave a televised address acknowledging the country's problems, but did not mention stepping down.
Whatever the pros and cons of the way they went about registering those concerns, I, as the President of Zimbabwe and as their Commander-in-Chief, do acknowledge the issues they have drawn my attention to, and do believe that these were raised in the spirit of honesty and out of deep and patriotic concern for the stability of our nation.
President Mugabe's announcement came after Zimbabwe's ruling party, ZANU-PF, has stripped him of his office under threat of impeachment and removed him from the party. Other members of the party, including First Lady Grace Mugabe, were also expelled. We'll have more on the crisis in Zimbabwe after headlines. In Washington, D.C., thousands of people rallied on the National Mall Sunday, calling for justice for Puerto Rico, 2 months after Hurricane Maria made landfall. The protesters called on FEMA to act quickly to restore services and for the cancellation of Puerto Rico's debt. They also demanded Congress permanently waive shipping restrictions under the Jones Act. Half of Puerto Rico remains without power. Hundreds of thousands of residents still have no access to clean drinking water. Hollywood actor Jeffrey Tambor said Sunday he's leaving the hit Amazon series Transparent after 2 transgender women accused him of unwanted sexual conduct. In one allegation, actress Van Barnes says Tambor sexually harassed and groped her. In another, Tambor's co-star Trace Lysette said he pushed his body against her between takes on the set of Transparent. Tambor has denied the allegations. He plays a trans star. Meanwhile, music mogul and activist Russell Simmons is denying allegations of rape and sexual assault after model Carrie Clausen-Kaligi says Simmons coerced her to perform oral sex before raping her in a shower in 1991 when she was just 17 years old. Kaligi says filmmaker Brett Ratner looked on during the assault and ignored her pleas for help. Ratner himself faces accusations from at least 6 women, including one account that he overpowered a woman and forced her to perform oral sex on him when she was 19 years old. At least 5 people say they were sexually harassed or groped at a TED Talks conference in Vancouver last April. Among those reporting abuse is TED Talks' own general counsel, who said in an email she was touched inappropriately and that executives at the nonprofit Speakers Series weren't doing enough to combat sexual harassment. The U.S. Congress Office of Compliance says it's paid out more than $17 million to settle cases of sexual harassment, as well as discrimination based on race, religion, and disability. The cases were paid out of a special fund operated by the Treasury Department, rather than by members of Congress or their staffers who are accused of the discrimination or harassment. The disclosure comes as a number of female Congress members have come forward to say they've been victims of sexual harassment. Meanwhile, Minnesota Democratic Senator Al Franken says he will not resign following accusations by radio broadcaster Leanne Tweeden that Franken groped her while she slept and forced her to kiss him in 2006. Last week, Leanne Tweeden posted a photo showing Franken appearing to place his hands on her breasts over her Kevlar vest while she was sleeping on a plane back from a USO tour that they both had participated in. Al Franken was a comedian at the time. He says he supports a full investigation by Congress. President Trump said Sunday he should have allowed 3 college basketball players from UCLA to remain in a Chinese jail after they were arrested on shoplifting charges. Trump's comment came as he took credit for negotiating the release of the players who were accused of stealing designer sunglasses from a high-end store. After the father of one of the players downplayed Trump's role in securing the release of the players, Trump tweeted, "LeVar Ball, the father of LiAngelo, is unaccepting of what I did for his son and that shoplifting is no big deal. I should have left them in jail," the president tweeted. In Iraq, U.S.-backed Iraqi forces say they've retaken the town of Rawa from ISIS, one of the last urban areas held by the group. Meanwhile, Syria's army says it took control of Abu Kamal over the weekend, the last town in Syria held by ISIS. The fight against ISIS has largely destroyed whole cities, including Raqqa and Mosul, leaving tens of thousands dead and displacing hundreds of thousands of people. In Turkey, the governor of Ankara province, home to Turkey's capital, has banned all events by LGBTQ groups, including parades, protests, films, theater performances, and art exhibitions. In a statement, Ankara's government said such events were likely to, quote, provoke reactions within certain segments, unquote, of society, adding that terrorists might target Pride events. In response, the organization of Pride Week said it would defy the ban and proceed with a planned march. The group's president said, quote, "The government should protect us, the group that is being threatened, not nationalist fundamentalist groups. I believe the ban is about not accepting our sexual orientation, and it's a reaction to the movement getting stronger," the statement read. In Libya, human rights groups are accusing the government of looking the other way as migrants are sold at auction in a modern-day slave trade. New video obtained by CNN shows men at an unknown location in Libya auctioning off enslaved sub-Saharan African migrants. One grainy cell phone video shows 2 enslaved men sold for 1,200 Libyan dinars, or about $800, as a man off-screen promises, quote, "big, strong boys for farm work," unquote. The CNN investigation comes after the United Nations warned the European Union over its support for Libya's Coast Guard as it turns back migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean and forces them into migrant camps where they face appalling conditions. In Germany, Angela Merkel's position as chancellor is uncertain after talks aimed at forming a coalition government collapsed on Monday. Merkel had been trying to form a new government after inconclusive elections in September. Observers say the turmoil could benefit the far-right Alternative for Democracy Party, which made record gains in this year's elections. In Mexico City, trade delegates from the U.S., Mexico, and Canada have opened formal talks aimed at renegotiating NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. President Trump's pressing Canada and Mexico for concessions, claiming NAFTA is tilted against the United States. As talks opened Friday, Mexican farmers and workers protested outside. This is activist Hector Cruz.
We are demanding that the voice of society, civil society, farmers, and citizens be heard in these negotiations. Because for us it is clear that after 23 years, the North American Free Trade Agreement has only been a great economic and social disaster for our country. Now we are threatened that what is being negotiated inside will be even worse.
Back in the United States, immigrants' rights protesters in Tucson, Arizona, targeted Breitbart news editor and President Trump's former chief strategist Steve Bannon as he gave a keynote address Saturday to a U.S. Border Patrol-affiliated group. Outside, scores of protesters were confined by police to an area blocks from the Brian Terry Foundation's awards banquet, but one person was able to slip inside to personally confront Bannon. This is cell phone video shot by protester Brian Sanders.
I'm from Tucson.
Hey, how you doing, brother?
I'm Brian.
Hey, Brian, how you doing, man?
And I just want you to know, because I couldn't have you come to Tucson and not hear this.
Yeah.
What you're proposing out there is driving the country apart.
Yeah.
And I know that you know this. I know that you know that you're a white supremacist. You're about to have an orange jumpsuit.
It's not that true.
You're going to have an orange jumpsuit.
Thanks, brother.
How about we do this? 1, 2, 3. Treason. Say treason for me.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Getting out of here, man. All right, I'm leaving.
A new study finds black men continue to be sentenced to far longer prison terms than white men committing similar crimes. The study by the U.S. Sentencing Commission found African-American men receive sentences 20% longer, and that the sentencing disparity has increased over the last 20 years. In Jacksonville, Florida, students and anti-fascist activists are planning a counter-protest at the University of North Florida today as neo-Nazis plan to rally on behalf of a student who is suspended after posting a threatening photo on social media. The photograph shows political science student Ken Parker shirtless, posing with a semi-automatic assault rifle and a swastika tattooed on his chest. Parker posted it to Black Lives Matter-aligned student group's Facebook page, along with a threat against the group's Students for a Democratic Society. President Trump said Sunday he's reversing his administration's plan to allow trophy hunters to import the bodies of elephants they kill in Zambia and Zimbabwe. In a tweet, Trump wrote, quote, "Big game trophy decision will be announced next week, but will be very hard-pressed to change my mind that this horror show in any way helps conservation of elephants or any other animal." President Trump's 2 adult sons, Eric and Donald Jr., are longtime trophy hunters. A 2012 picture of Donald Trump Jr. in Zimbabwe shows him standing in front of the corpse of an African elephant, holding a knife in one hand and a severed tail of the elephant in the other. In Nebraska, about 100 protesters rallied at the Capitol in Lincoln on Sunday, calling on their state to deny a permit allowing the company TransCanada to build the Keystone XL pipeline. The protests came ahead of a crucial meeting today at Nebraska's Public Utility Commission on whether to allow construction of the expanded Keystone pipeline, which opponents say threatens to pollute Nebraska's Oglala aquifer while driving greenhouse gas emissions from oil extracted in Canada's tar sands region. And youth activists around the country have buried 50-year time capsules containing their hopes and fears for the planet's future after President Trump moved to withdraw the U.S. from the Paris Climate Accord. Members of the Climate Legacy Time Capsule Project say they're working to kick out politicians at all levels of government who are putting fossil fuel billionaires ahead of future generations. In New York City, dozens of youth placed handwritten letters and artwork in a metal cylinder and buried it in Washington Square Park. This is 16-year-old activist Shaza Hussein.
For the next 50 years, I hope to see that elected officials are changing the tide, and we're shifting towards protecting the earth and making sure that we do things like protecting Native American communities and measuring the cultural impacts, moving towards renewable energy, just moving towards clean energy and formulating a better future and a future worth meeting for future generations.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Zimbabwe, where longtime leader Robert Mugabe is refusing to resign as president amidst a growing political crisis in Zimbabwe. Members of Zimbabwe's ruling party are preparing to meet to discuss Mugabe's impeachment after the deadline for him to resign came and went this morning. On Sunday, Mugabe gave a televised address acknowledging the country's problems, but did not mention stepping down.
Whatever the pros and cons of the way they went about registering those concerns, I, as the President of Zimbabwe and as their Commander-in-Chief, do acknowledge the issues they have drawn my attention to, and do believe that these were raised in the spirit of honesty and out of deep and patriotic concern for the stability of our nation. Of greater concern to our commanders are the well-founded fears that the lack of unity and commonness of purpose in both party and government was translating into perceptions of inattentiveness to the economy. Open public spurts between high-ranking officials in the party and government, exacerbated by multiple conflicting messages from both the party and government, made the criticisms leveled against us inescapable.
Zimbabwe's ruling party, ZANU-PF, has expelled Mugabe and First Lady Grace Mugabe from the party. Mugabe had been working to hand over power to his wife, Grace. The impeachment proceedings against Mugabe may now begin as soon as Tuesday. Last week, President Mugabe was placed under house arrest after Zimbabwe's military seized parliament, courts, government offices, and the main airport in the capital, Harare. The apparent coup came a week after President Mugabe ousted his vice president, Emmerson Mnangagwa. The military says it's appointed him as the interim president of Zimbabwe. On Sunday, after a week of relative calm, residents in Harare took to the streets to celebrate the expected announcement of Mugabe's resignation, only to be disappointed by his refusal to step down.
We're expecting to hear the president say, I've heard your concerns yesterday and I'm ready to step down. This is not what we're expecting, to hear a long speech without any results for us. The results were simple. I am stepping down. I am handing over the country to someone else.
Robert Mugabe has held power since Zimbabwe declared independence 37 years ago. Well, for more, we're joined by Glenn Mpani, Mason Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, democracy and governance practitioner who's worked for the last 15 years in Africa. His recent op-ed in the New York Times is headlined, "For Zimbabwe, a coup isn't the answer." Glenn Mpani, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about what is the latest in Zimbabwe and give us background on how to understand it?
Thank you so much. It's good to be on your show. As you are aware, Zimbabwe has been confronted with an economic and political crisis for the last 20 years. The crisis has been largely due to bad governance, centralization of power, and the inability of the ZANU-PF government to be able to provide alternative solutions to address the economic crisis. The crisis has also resulted in the countries being placed on sanctions. It has resulted in multitudes of Zimbabwe fleeing the country to go to other countries to be able to earn a living. And if you look at some of the key things that have been a major challenge for a day-to-day Zimbabwe, unemployment is at 98%. There are shortages of water, electricity, and cash within the country. So these are some of the major economic issues that have been a problem. But of major concern the last 3-4 years have been issues that have to deal with succession within ZANU-PF. And within ZANU-PF, there have been two major factions that have been trying to ensure that they can be able to succeed Mugabe. One of the factions was led by the former Vice President Emmerson Mnangagwa, was booted out a couple of weeks from ZANU-PF, and the other faction was led by the First Lady Grace Mugabe, which the president of Zimbabwe, Mugabe, is regarded to have been part of. So this jostling for position reached fever pitch a couple of weeks ago when there was the expulsion of the vice president from his post as the vice president of the country as a result that he was feigning, he was promoting factionalism. And in that process, a free-for-all event took place where we saw the security, which has been very close to Vice President Mnangagwa, aligning themselves to it and in essence moving in to ensure that they can be able to restore him. On the other side, the faction that was aligned to the First Lady was pushing to ensure that they page all the structures and ensure that they align them with the faction of the First Lady. So what we are confronted with here is factional issues or intra-party disagreements within ZANU-PF that have largely sped into a national crisis. And unfortunately, there has been now a convergence of issues where Zimbabweans, the general public, is tired of the leadership of ZANU-PF, and they've been saying it for many, many years. And now we have one individual who everyone is in agreement that they should go. We've got a faction in ZANU-PF that would not want him to stay, and the generality of Zimbabwe that would not want him to be there. So there is a common enemy on the ground to say, let's get him out. But there are nuances that people need to pick out. The nuances are as follows. The ZANU-PF faction that is pushing for this, in all intents and purposes, is not sincere in terms of economic recovery and democratization of Zimbabwe. They are simply doing it simply because they want to install one of their own. And the people rallying with them, they are using it as an opportunity for them to be able to gain legitimacy, for them to be able to sanitize themselves as a pro-democratic movement. But in essence, that is not their agenda and their cause.
So talk about, for people who are not familiar with Zimbabwe's history, 37 years ago, gaining independence from England. It used to be called Rhodesia for Cecil Rhodes. Robert Mugabe, a leading independence activist, as was his vice president, who has just been appointed president. Give us the history of Zimbabwe in Africa.
Zimbabwe attained independence in 1980 and offered a lot of hope for the continent. I think if you look at the history of Zimbabwe, we're regarded as the breadbasket of the continent. We largely were able to produce commodities such as tobacco. We were able to feed ourselves and to feed other regions on the continent. We're able to have a very robust and vibrant education system. Our health sector was very effective. And we were proud as a country for us to be able to provide a shining example in terms of how a country can be able to transition from colonial rule. But what remained post-independence 1980 was that we had the dominance of ZANU-PF. Regardless of the dominance of ZANU-PF there and the existence of ZAPU as an opposition party, which had largely also played a very pivotal role during the liberation struggle, we focused more on the economy and paid very little attention in terms of the politics. So the idea of centralizing authority and power remained a key tenet of the ZANU-PF government. But unfortunately, because there was very little opposition to them, there was less attention that was paid to them because they were a darling of the West. The British loved them so much. Donors were pouring money into Zimbabwe. But at pre-2000, when they went on to introduce the IMF conditions for them to be able to reform the economy, we started noticing, one, the cutting down of the social base. Levels of unemployment increased. There was now high inflation. And this, in instance, led to the rise of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union, the largest labor movement that resulted in the formation of the now major political party in Zimbabwe, the Movement for Democratic Change. This ushered in a new era within Zimbabwean politics, where the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union was now challenging the government to say, one, there are high levels of corruption. Two, the basic livelihood issues of and ordinary Zimbabweans cannot be met. And this resulted in the formation of an opposition. And this opposition, since 2000, has successively been participating in elections, which have largely been seen as unfair, and where it has been seen to have won. But unfortunately, because of the military, this military that has just intervened, which played a role in instituting violence, rigging of elections, inflicting reprisals on key activists, it became very, very difficult for any prospect of an opposition being able to get into office through an electoral process. I recall there was even an instance where all these generals had to do a press conference where they categorically stated that in no way would they allow anyone who has never fought in the liberation struggle to be a leader of Zimbabwe. And true to their word, they have been very consistent. And if you see what is currently happening, they are making sure, because the G40 is regarded as a faction within ZANU-PF of young people who don't have liberation credentials. So true to their word, the insistence of them intervening to have Mnangagwa come in as their candidate is in line with their agenda that they will never accept anyone who doesn't have liberation credentials.
Glenn and Pani, I wanted to ask you about Zimbabwe's opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, who you were talking about, returned to Zimbabwe from South Africa, reportedly discussing plans to form a government of national unity with Emmerson Mnangagwa, who the military has appointed as interim president. Tsvangirai served as prime minister under Mugabe from 2009-13, former labor activist who was repeatedly arrested by Zimbabwean authorities, subject to beatings, torture while in jail. We only have a minute and a half, but if you can talk about both Tsvangirai, Mnangagwa, and the power of the First Lady as well, if you can talk about the power of Grace Mugabe and where she fits into this, now also expelled from the party.
Let me start with the First Lady. I think the First Lady made a greater disservice to Mugabe, whose image had already been eroded. I think she overstretched her hand, she overplayed her hand, and in essence did not manage to be able to play an effective role in ensuring that Mugabe can steer this succession agenda. She played a very divisive role, and unfortunately, this has culminated into this. And if you listen to most Zimbabweans, they expressed greater revulsion and hatred in terms of what she has done, because in essence, she caused this to be able to implode. So if you are to move away from looking at Grace, so moving forward as a factor, I don't see her as a factor. I think if she's going to play a role, she'll play a role within ZANU-PF. That is if they want her, but from the signs that are there, they've expelled her. And I don't think there will be an opportunity for Mugabe leaves. I don't think she'll have any opportunity in any realignment or in the future politics of Zimbabwe. This might actually be the end of her political career. When it comes to Mnangagwa and Tsvangirai, I think they can come up with an alliance of convenience where they can say, let's have an interim arrangement or a transitional government. But I don't see that bringing any meaningful change. It can bring relief in an interim phase, but it will not work. Both of them are desperate. Mnangagwa wants legitimacy. He wants international acclaim. Morgan Tsvangirai is desperate. He also wants to get into government, considering that he's not also feeling well. So they are joined together by their
He's
personal
undergoing
ambitions.
cancer treatment, right?
That's undergoing cancer treatment. But in terms of the greater good, I see an elite pact. I don't see any substantive reforms in terms of them coming out of this process. I don't think all still have the appetite for them to push an agenda. So unfortunately, if citizens in Zimbabwe don't challenge whatever deals or decisions that whatever interim arrangement is going to come up with, they will realize that they will have another 37 years where the status quo remains, because now elite interests and selfish interests are now taking precedence over what needs to be done in terms of reforming Zimbabwe.
I want to thank you so much, Glenn Mpani, for joining us, Zimbabwean scholar, Mason Fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, democracy and governance practitioner who's worked for the last 15 years in Africa. We'll link to your piece in the New York Times for Zimbabwe. A coup is not the answer. When we come back, the UN Climate Summit has just wrapped up. We're just back from Bonn, Germany. We'll speak with Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto, who was part of the anti-Trump revolt in Bonn. Remember when President Trump said, "I serve Pittsburgh, not Paris"? So we'll here from Pittsburgh. Stay with us.
Some rights and some wrongs, some heroes and songs are much better left unsung. Between fiction and fact, illusion and pact, where we've been into what we've become. Although we have changed, we're never estranged, and there's nothing I'd trade.
Heroes and Songs by Brandi Carlile here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We have just returned from the UN Climate Summit in Bonn, Germany, where early Saturday morning, officials representing nearly 200 nations ended an all-night round of negotiations aimed at hammering out the implementation of the 2015 Paris climate deal. Many had feared the U.S. would fully derail this year's talks, as this year was the first COP since President Trump vowed to pull the U.S. out of the landmark 2015 Paris Accord, a process which would take 4 years. But the Fiji prime minister, who presided over this year's COP, that's Conference of Parties, said there were notable achievements this year in the agreements around agriculture, ocean protection, indigenous peoples' rights, and a new climate insurance system for poorer nations. Another achievement included the launch of the Powering Past Coal Alliance, a group of more than 20 nations who've committed to phasing out coal. The United States, along with Germany, Poland, Australia, China, and India, refused to sign on to the pledge, although the U.S. states of Washington and Oregon bucked the federal government and did sign on. Many environmental activists, however, say this year's talks did not go nearly far enough, especially as new data shows global carbon dioxide emissions are once again rising after flatlining for 3 years straight. Meanwhile, on December 12th, France will host a climate change summit in Paris on the second anniversary of the signing of the landmark Paris climate deal. French President Emmanuel Macron says President Trump will not be invited. Well, despite President Trump's vows to pull out of the Paris climate deal, there were a number of progressive U.S. senators, governors, mayors who staged an anti-Trump revolt last week in Bonn. Among them, Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto. I began by asking Mayor Peduto of Pittsburgh when President Trump announced in July he was pulling the U.S. out of the Paris climate deal by saying he was elected to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris.
I was elected to represent the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. It is time to put Youngstown, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, along with many, many other locations within our great country, before Paris, France. It is time to make America great again.
So there he was, Mayor Peduto, saying, I'm here to represent Pittsburgh, not Paris. Your response?
Well, there I was. I get a little alert, and it just says President Trump to leave Paris Agreement. And I just went, that's horrible, because I was at COP21. I was one of nearly 500 mayors that gathered, the largest gathering of mayors in Earth's history, to be able to say to the federal governments, we got this. We're going to do it anyways. We're going to implement it. It's okay. And then about 2 minutes later, I see a tweet from Sean Spicer, and it has that quote on it. And according to my chief of staff, I walked into his office and I just yelled, Pittsburgh. It flew in the face of 30 years of progress that Pittsburgh had made. A city that had lost the quality of its air and its water in an effort to build this country, building every skyscraper, every bridge, and then a city that died, whose economic heart was ripped out of it. And instead of trying to find a way to rebuild the factories and the mills and the mines, found a way to reinvent itself. Very much in the spirit of what the Paris Agreement was talking about. And if there was one city the president could point to that would represent what that spirit of the Paris Agreement was, it was Pittsburgh. So I was taken aback by the very fact that he was using an old stereotype of Pittsburgh in order to make his point.
And you said Pittsburgh stands with the world and will follow Paris Agreement. What kind of response did you get from the White House, Mayor?
There was no response from the White House. And the response that I received received from colleagues across the country was overwhelming support. We're with you. The amount of support from the social media, from globally, saying that we're with Pittsburgh and Paris, and then Mayor Hidalgo reaching out as well, and then we penned an op-ed together called Pittsburgh and Paris, and that op-ed led to this op-ed coming into this COP23, Pittsburgh and Bonn. What can we learn from post-industrial cities that won't just allow them to play catch-up to other cities when we're talking about climate change, but leapfrogging other cities to be the leaders in climate change?
So what are you doing in Pittsburgh? What is your commitment to renewables, to a sustainable city? What
we've done in the past year since the president's announcement is increased our commitment to zero waste, increased our commitment to 100% renewable, increased our commitment to ways that transportation, urban planning, housing will all be affected by minimizing the amount of carbon that we're going to be producing. And we've now exceeded what we promised in the Paris Agreement. And that's been happening throughout this country. Throughout the United States, you see city after city doing it. It's very important to note that that day the president made that statement, there were 61 U.S. cities that were part of the climate cities. Pittsburgh was one of them. Today, there's 367. It's galvanized the support, Democrat and Republican mayors, Democrat and Republican councils, saying that we will follow through, that we are still in.
We're both here in Bonn, but Democracy Now! Broadcasts from New York from a LEED Platinum certified studio. You talked in this event that was sponsored by young people, young environmental activists, about environmental construction in Pittsburgh. What are you doing to make the building of Pittsburgh sustainable?
Well, Pittsburgh was one of the leaders in the green building movement, and it was led by a woman named Teresa Hines, and she saw the potential of it not only being something that was sustainable, but could also help to bring Pittsburgh back by manufacturing the materials, understanding the techniques, and being able to do it. And so we've partnered with our trade unions in order to be able to take LEED certification to a point where it also means good wages, union wages. We've been able then to take it to the next level, living buildings, buildings that actually use the same amount of energy as a flower. And Pittsburgh is the only city in the world with 2 examples that are presently open. And then we've taken it to passive housing, but not just passive housing, but passive affordable housing. Affordable housing for folks who are getting out of situations where they've been in orphanages or halfway houses, and for seniors to be able to live in quality housing later in life that they can afford to live in quality environmental housing. So we want to see how environmental housing can affect everyone. We were chosen as a choice neighborhood by HUD, and we're creating our greenest development in our poorest neighborhood. And we've also just...
How are you doing that?
We've created a program that went by the neighborhood's community plan that called for green housing, the building of a new park, the establishment of more greenery and urban forest, and we've put it into one of our lowest income neighborhoods. And the last thing that we're doing, we're with HUD right now working to build the largest urban farm in the country. Pittsburgh, in an area that had been abandoned years ago from a former housing area to an area that will come back with mixed housing, including affordability, in the largest urban farm in America.
So you're on the terrorism watch list?
Yeah.
Mayor Peduto of Pittsburgh?
That would have made it hard to get onto a plane. So there was a lot of conversation that was going on in Pittsburgh very early on with fracking and trying to understand the balance between what the Constitution of Pennsylvania guarantees every Pennsylvanian, which is the guarantee of safe water, and what we could do and what challenges fracking in the city of Pittsburgh would mean in regards to 3 rivers that supply drinking water to all of our people. The question was, would we be able to have a legal argument to ban through zoning the fracking occurring because of the proximity to either high population density or drinking water. And it wasn't really sure, but we were pushing it anyways. During that same process, it came out through an article, I believe, in the Philadelphia Inquirer, that the City Council of the City of Pittsburgh had been placed on the Pennsylvania Homeland Security's terrorism watch list. And during that same time period, we wanted to know how and why that occurred. The person who had been hired by Ed Rendell was removed from office. The bill went through, and it was never challenged. Had it been challenged, we made it very clear we were going to call for full disclosure.
And so what happened now?
There hasn't been any fracking in the city of Pittsburgh. Even though there were land leases at that time in different areas of the city, there's never been a challenge by any of the companies either.
And were you ever stopped from going on a plane?
No.
Let me ask you about sanctuary cities. Is Pittsburgh a sanctuary city?
It is by the definitions of what a sanctuary city is, meaning that we will not detain, arrest any individual based upon a request by ICE as long as there isn't a warrant for their arrest. We will not use our local law enforcement to be federal officials because it goes against the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, and it could also go against the 4th Amendment of search and seizure. We recognize that the rights of individuals under being in this country guarantees them rights under the Constitution. So that part of it is. But our jail system and our court system is separate than our municipal government system. So we don't have any say over those parts of it.
So does this mean you lose any federal funding?
No, because that's been proven in court cases as well, that the interpretation...
They threatened you with it.
Well, yes, they have. And they actually had required cities in applying for the COP grants, the COP grants, to sign to it that they would not be a sanctuary city or would cooperate with ICE on any of the actions. I wouldn't sign it.
So what are you doing here? I mean, we cover this COP summit every single year since Copenhagen. Big U.S. official delegation. This year, well, it looks like the Trump administration will be here, represented by Peabody Coal and a few other corporations, maybe a few government officials. They'll be pushing nuclear power, gas, and coal. So you have a different delegation here. You have a major tent. It's thousands of feet. What's happening? The government's split in two?
I don't think that that is the case. I think that what you're seeing is Americans, citizens of the country, some elected officials, lots of NGOs, saying to the world, we're still in. That we're willing to be able to be here to tell you that we're still going to meet our commitments. Even though one part of our federal government, the executive branch of our federal government, has said that they aren't going to follow the Paris Agreement, it doesn't mean that individual cities, states, organizations, corporations, and others won't do our part to meet it. And in doing so, we'll be doing what we can, and basically what is the most important part of it, implementation, to make sure that the United States does follow the Paris Agreement.
And your thoughts on President Trump being a proud climate change denier?
God bless democracy. I can't say anything for, for the president or his opinions, but I know that I can do my part, and every American can do their part to assure that there's a safe and secure future for our country, economic opportunity and growth through a green economy, and the opportunity to do what our responsibility is to assure that climate change has a minimum negative impact.
President Trump was just in China. It looks like China will be the leader when it comes to building solar panels, alternative energy. They see the market is wide open with the U.S. pushing coal, nuclear, and gas. Your thoughts about this?
Well, we're in Germany, and Germany is a major producer of wind turbines made by German steel by German workers. We see in China the solar cell technology advancing to the point past the United States where the solar cells themselves are becoming able to secure more energy. We look at India where they're being assembled into solar panels, and I ask, why not West Virginia? Why not Michigan? Why not Ohio and Pennsylvania? Why can't we be the ones that are manufacturing and creating these jobs of tomorrow instead of being sold a false promises of the jobs of yesterday?
That's Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto at the UN Climate Summit in Bonn, Germany last week. When we come back, we'll hear from Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. Stay with us. That's the coup. Best wishes to Pam the Functress. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We are just back from our week-long broadcast from the UN Climate Summit in Bonn, Germany, where a number of U.S. senators, mayors, governors staged a defiant anti-Trump revolt declaring, "We're still in." That's the landmark 2015 Paris climate deal. In Bonn, I spoke with Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe.
Here because we need to send a message to the world. Forget what Donald Trump says, that we are serious about climate change. I'm the governor of Virginia, and when Trump moved out of the Paris Climate Agreement, I was the first governor to come out and say, we're going to do it ourselves. So through an executive directive, I'm doing what we should have been done at the national level on the Paris Agreement. I'm embarrassed about what Donald Trump did. So I'm here to spread the message. Trump isolated himself. He did not isolate the United States of America.
Specifically, what was that executive directive that you issued in Virginia?
So we are moving ahead in Virginia as if the Paris Climate Agreement is still in effect. We are going to meet the same standards. We are joining the RGGI states, and we're doing, as I say, I did it to an executive director by the power of the governor to do it. I would not have been successful trying to get it through my legislature. We did have a huge win in Virginia on Tuesday and picked up at least 15 seats. So our legislature, maybe now we can get it done, but we couldn't before. And my directive says we're going to meet the Paris Agreement. We're going to do it. It's the right thing to do.
So talk about that win. What Ralph Northam means for Virginia. There was a lot of speculation Ed Gillespie was going to pull it out, but he didn't.
I never thought Ed was going to pull it. I was very public on national television. I said we're going to win all three statewide. But what was astounding what happened the other day is we picked up 15 House of Delegate seats. That's the most in 100 years. 11 of them were women. A majority of women came out and ran. This was a clear message. One, an affirmation. We've had 4 great years. We have led on the issues of climate change in Virginia. We've done it through executive authority. You know, when I took office, we had 17 megawatts of solar. Today, we're almost at 3,000, literally in 3.5 years. We're the first state to do an offshore utility wind project. I just announced it off Virginia Beach with Dong Energy out of Denmark and Dominion Power. So we've led on these different issues. And so for me, well, I've had to do it through executive authority because my legislature would never go for it. Only 34 Democrats out of 100. Now with the pickups means we can now make these law and codify it, this is a huge win for the climate issue.
So solar power, China's really excelling in this. President Trump was just in China. He talks about being the president of jobs and the economy. It is amazing for so many that he is ceding this whole renewable technology field, the really growing field, to China.
It's sad. Because, as I say, we've gone from 17 megawatts to almost 3,000. But the next phase is we've got to have the manufacturing of the solar facilities in America. I'd like a lot of those in Virginia. And Trump to go over there and listen, China makes most of the solar panels. We should be doing this in America. You want to bring manufacturing back to this country, the renewable energy. I've created 77,000 energy efficiency jobs just in the last couple of years. This is the future. And, you know, Trump has no credibility after he pulled out of Paris. You know, I always say he's tweeting all day. He's like the crazy uncle up in the closet, up in the attic. You just don't know what he's going to do in a given day. He talks about jobs, but he's not delivering jobs. Not only on climate, look what he's done on the travel ban. Look what he's done on immigration. Look what he's done on health care. He has done nothing but hurt. I can say this as governor, Virginians. My premiums are going up 53% in health care. He has terrorized my immigrant community. I've had to go to Dulles Airport on the travel ban and say, no, you're not going to hold U.S. citizens, Virginians, in a holding pen for 5 hours without access to legal counsel. So that's why I'm so honored to be here today, to have so many people engaged in the climate movement.
So you had some really interesting victories in Virginia. You had the first trans state legislator, a former journalist who's been elected.
Well, what is so beautiful about this, to be honest with you, Bob Marshall was the most conservative, homophobic member of our House of Delegates. I vetoed all of his bills. He had HB2 bills, transgender bills. He sponsored all of them. Defunding Planned Parenthood. Bob Marshall sponsored all of them, and he was defeated by a transgender. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
And he called himself, what, a proud homophobe?
Yeah, he said that. That was his phrase that he had, and he's now gone. And I give Danica Rome credit. On election night, they asked her about him, and she said, he is now a constituent of mine, which I thought was a classy thing to say. We have had interesting elections in Virginia. But I think the message, honestly, the message come out. We needed a win for the Democrats. So people were happy of the 4 years that we've had. Record job investment, $19 billion of new capital coming in, which is $6 billion more than any governor ever. I've restored more rights than any governor in the history of the United States of America. I've kept all the women's health clinics open. I'm the most progressive governor in the history of the state. I've leaned in on the issues. I've told the NRA to go jump off a cliff. A good 4 years, and then the anti-Trump. And my lieutenant governor was at my side the whole time. We are a new Virginia. We got the Democratic Party off the mat in this country, and now we need to take it to the next level. We got to win the Congress back, and we have 36 governors coming up in 2018. We got to win a majority of those.
So Lee Carter just won, who is a Democratic socialist from Manassas, won for the House of Delegates, the state legislature in Virginia. He was a Marine, he's a socialist, and he beat the incumbent, who is the majority whip.
Yeah, he beat a member of the Republican leadership, which is very, very important, Jackson Miller. And he did it by laying out a positive agenda, create new jobs, build the new Virginia economy, which is what I talk every single day. So you had Lee Carter win, you had Danica Rome win. We picked up at least 15. We're going into a recount. We got 3 more seats. I'd like to get control of the House of Delegates, and then we can continue on. I've had to do everything, unfortunately, through executive authority. As I say, with 34 out of 100 Democrats, Republicans control. But it's a new day in Virginia. We are the spark plug. It's going to bring the Democrats back, win the House of Representatives next year, pick up a majority of these Democratic governors. I mean, big states, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, we got to keep our governor there. But we've got to pick up in Florida. These are important states.
Finally, I want to ask you about Donna Brazil's comments, the former interim chair of the DNC. Elizabeth Warren, said, yeah, the election was rigged, and they were talking about this deal made between the DNC and the Clinton campaign, that the Clinton campaign would raise the money and then would have the say about how the DNC would spend it, when at the time Hillary Clinton wasn't even the candidate yet, and she was, of course, going against Bernie Sanders. A lot of his supporters were saying it was rigged at the time.
From what I'm told, and I wasn't part of the agreement, so I don't know, was the agreements for the general election. And the same deal, I believe, was offered to Senator Sanders. That's all I know. But here's my point. No offense to Donna, I could care less. I'm sitting on an election victory Tuesday, and I didn't want any disruptions. Donna's book is not going to create one job in Virginia. It's not going to get one person health care. It's not going to help me build one single road. Democrats got to stay unified. I'm not into negative energy. I'm just not.
Well, it wasn't about her book, but it's about just that point.
No. The book came out at a very unfortunate time, but as I say, I campaigned all weekend. I did 17 events on the weekend. Nobody asked me about the book. Now, should the reforms be to the process and all that? I'm all for that. You want a fair process. But I can't look back. I got to look forward. We had an earthquake in Virginia on Tuesday to get the Democrats back and unified. we now, as I say, I've been the most progressive governor in the history of the state. I've taken on the NRA. I've taken on the Koch brothers. We keep beating them. We got to have Democrats unified in this country. We got to win the Congress. We got to win the governor's mansions across the country, because here's the issue. We have 36 up. In 2020, they do the census. In 2021, they redraw every line in America. Right now, 2/3 of the chambers are controlled by Republican legislators. They are going to draw lines to give them more power. And nothing happens in Congress. Nothing. I'm the biggest critic of Congress because they don't do anything. So what's happening is at the state level, the rollback of women's rights, gay rights, environmental rights, voting rights, pro-gun rights, it's all happening through the state legislatures. And Democrats got to wake up and quit talking about the presidential election and better start talking about state and local, or we are going to get crushed from 2021 to 2031.
That's what the Koch brothers say. They focus at the state and the local level. What about not only the Koch brothers, what Senator Merkley calls the Koch cartel, but also the Mercer money that really backed Trump and ultimately led to his victory?
And this is my point. You know, I'm not going to sit here and criticize all of them. They went out, and you know what? They're sitting in the White House. We got to get smarter as Democrats. We got to fight. You know, I'm not into these circular fire and squad. I'm tired of the whining. It's time to fight. I, as governor, from the day I took office, have been fighting on progressive issues, and I've beaten them. But I've had to do it as an executive. My legislature would not be with me on any of these issues. We need Democrats who are fighting on the values that they believe in. Too many Democrats today put their finger up in the air and say which way the poll's going. I don't do that. When I ran for governor, I had a historic win, a 40-year trend I broke. I was, I believe, the first person in the South, statewide, to come out for marriage equality. I told women I'd be a brick wall to protect their rights, and I told the NRA to go jump off a cliff. They gave me an F rating. No one in Virginia governor had ever run like that. I was proud of that, and you know what? I won. I ran on the things I believed in, but you know, if I didn't win the next day, so be it. My life wouldn't change. Democrats got to fight on their values, and we're not always going to agree on every issue. I'm not into litmus tests. I'm sorry. Fight for what you believe in. Go swinging. If you don't win, so be it.
Last question about gun control. What about this issue? You say you've taken on the NRA. What do you think the country has to learn? Massacre after massacre. What does the country have to do?
What they have to learn is we got to elect Democratic members of Congress after Newtown, Connecticut, if we couldn't get anything done on gun legislation. In Virginia, every year I put up background checks. Every single year. And I was defeated in committee early in the morning with no recorded vote. That's how it happens in Virginia. But the Congress is the same way. We got to get more thoughtful people in Congress. And I'm for common sense gun restrictions. I'm not advocating anything over the top. I've said this. I'm a gun owner. I hunt. I take my boys hunting. But I went through background checks as governor. It takes 5 minutes. Everybody should go through that. And nobody who's entitled to own a firearm will be denied. But there are people who shouldn't have them, and I'm just disgusted at the power of the NRA. They're based in Virginia. I fight them every day. I beat them. In fact, last year in Virginia, we passed legislation, the strongest protective order in the United States of America. In Virginia, if you have a domestic protective order against you, you have 24 hours to hand your gun in if there's one in the household. And if you don't, it's a Class 6 felony. You're going to prison, and your gun is gone for life. Virginia, the strongest protective order in the United States of America. I'm proud of that as governor because the NRA is based in our state.
That's Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe. I was speaking with him in Bonn, Germany, at the UN Climate Summit. To see our full week's coverage, the only national broadcast from the United States that devoted every single show to the UN Bonn Summit, to the issue of climate change and global warming, you can go to democracynow.org. that does it for the show. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, Amel Ahmed, and Nat Needham. Special thanks to Dennis Moynihan and Nicole Salazar. Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee are our engineers. We also thank Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Hugh Grant, David Prude, Ariel Boone. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!